All right, guys, welcome to another revision session that we're going over. So in this revision session, again, we'll be looking at the arrays tutorial that has been posted online. I'm not sure if you covered it this week, but again, we're going to be covering it again for those who may have missed something. So if you have any queries with regards to what we're doing right now, you can let me know. Also, if you have additional questions that you are unsure about and you want them to be covered, you can just let me know of that. But nonetheless, we're just going to continue to go over this tutorial, right? So I'm going to hide my video and then we can get started. Right. So with question one, right, you're required to develop an application for the UKZ10 Super Ultra Marathon, right? The application must capture the names and finish times of each runner. So this is the sample input, right, that we're gonna have, right? So you can use this as a sample, right? To give you an idea of what you're gonna be typing in to the what is this to the to your input into your form. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. Right. So you're gonna have to create a structure, right, that will store the names and finish times of each participant. The time is stored into separate variables named hours and minutes, right? As an extra challenge, store it in a string variable and extract the hours and minutes using string handling. Right. So let's open up Visual Studio. And then create a new project. I'm just waiting for it to do its thinking. Right, so I'm gonna click on new project and then I will go to Visual C#, right? And then select Windows Form application, right? And then I'm gonna give it a name. So I'm gonna call this ISTN 212 revision tat 2, whatever. Right. So I'm gonna click browse, and then I am gonna go to a new folder. Then I'm just gonna say give it a name. So ISTN 212 revision tat. Right, and then I'm gonna select this folder. Right, once it's selected now, I can just click OK to create my project. Right. In the meantime, while it's doing, so we're gonna start with the first step, which is we're gonna have to create a structure, right, that will store the name and finish times, right? And we're gonna store it which is the R names and the runner name and the runner minutes, right? So here we go, we have a form created. So I'm gonna right click on the form, right? Once I've right clicked on it, then I'm gonna go to view code, right? So that I can edit the code behind, right? So once you add the code behind, then you are gonna have to then press enter. You can create it before or after, it doesn't matter, but you're gonna be creating a structure. So I'm gonna say public struct, right, to say that this is a structure, and then give the structure a name. So in terms of the structure name, it's gonna be you can call it anything. So I'm just gonna call it runner, right? And then I'm gonna open curly brackets, right? And then now I've created a structure now, but I need to put in the attributes inside the structure, right? So that I can use the variables that I need. So like a structure is just a blueprint, right, of how an item will be like, right? Like as for example, a blueprint of a car, right? What the car entails, what it has inside, its properties, etc. Right? It's similar to a class, right? The structure. So we're gonna store the runner name and the finish time, right? And it said that we're gonna store it in hours and minutes. So what we're gonna do here is I'm gonna create a variable, right? A string variable, which is gonna be the runner name, right? So I'm gonna say public string runner name, right? Semicolon. Right. So now I've declared the runner name, right? That's going to be the person that is running, right? But also we need to also mention now the finish times, right? So in terms of the finish time, we're going to separate it into two variables, the hours and also the minutes. So let's create another variable. So public int, we're going to store it as an integer, and then we're going to say hours, maybe let me just say r hours, right, semicolon. Then I'm going to create the other variable, which is a public int r minutes, right? All right, so these are the three attributes of the runner structure, right? That we have here, and it was said here that we needed to have those fields or attributes. All right, so now that we've stored the now that we've created the structure and its attributes, right? We're gonna have to store these variables, right? So we're gonna deal with that just now. So let's just create an array that will store a list of times for each participant, right? So after the structure here, right, we're gonna create this. So you're gonna say so you're gonna declare your array, right? So for the array, what I'll do is I'll have to then say, call the structure name, right, which is runner, because I want the array to be of type runner, right? And then I'm going to put the square brackets to show that this is an array. Then I'm going to give the array a name, right? So in this case, you can call it anything. So you can just call it race, and then I'm going to say equals to new runner, right? And then put square brackets inside the square brackets now, right? In terms of the number of runners, it wasn't really said what the number of runners are, but since we got a simple input, right, which is like 5, so I'm just going to use this 5, right? I don't want to complicate it like in the last preg where you dynamically change the array number of people that are in an array. But I mean, you can do that, but for this example and in the test, you typically will be told, right, that you will be told that this is the number of people in the race, etc., right? So it won't be something that you have to figure out on your own. But if it's not told, I mean, there are various ways in which you can update an array to contain the number of to contain the number of individuals that you want to add dynamically, right? So there's a question on the chats, right? Does the structure contain methods like it behaves a class, right? In terms of the structure, I've never really used a method within a structure. So, but I assume that since like it works as similarly to a class, it may allow a method. So, like for example, if you say public string, no, let me just say void, then I'm just gonna say runner and then open and close brackets like so. It's the name member names cannot be the same as their enclosing type. Okay. So you can't have a default constructor here. So let me just say runner method. Right. So then what I'm just gonna do is I'm just gonna say runner name is equal to runner name, right? I'm just gonna just give it the same name, right? Just for purpose what is this demonstration purposes, right? Or maybe just put a string name for as an example, right? Let me put that. So when I call this here, so I could then say but it's not gonna work like this when you're using an array, right? It's not gonna work the way you want it to work, right? So like for example, if you say this dot the reason why it's not gonna work because it's not within a method, so that's not gonna work like that. Okay, so let me add a button, right? So let me add a button and then double click on it, and then inside the button I'll say raise, but you won't use this, right? Like this, right? I'm just trying to see if it works based on your question that you just said. So yeah, it would work, but you can't name the method the same name as the runner class. That won't work that way. So I hope that answers your question. So it does behave like a class, but it's not a class, right? It differs. So let me just delete this here. Can we construct a struct? What do you mean with your question? It's not clear. What do you mean by saying construct a struct? Because if you creating one, are you asking me this here? Because that's how you construct a structure. As in provide it's a constructor. You, as I said earlier, with this method, right, when I created the method here, right, this runner method, you can't create a default constructor like so, right? Because it complains, right, that it cannot have the member names cannot be the same as the enclosing type, which is the runner, right? So you can't use a default constructor, but you can create constructors, methods, right, that are there inside the class, inside the runner structure. But for these methods, you're not gonna use them using the array because it's not gonna work the way you want it, right? Because you'd have to call the specific index of an array and then call the method, which is not really something that you would want to do. But I mean, as you can see, it does work, right? You can create methods within a structure just as you would within a class, but the only difference is that you cannot create a default constructor. A default constructor is just the same name as the class name, right? Like this, right? So you can't create a default constructor within a structure. Okay, that explains that. Yeah. Okay. So we created the array, right? We said we're just going to store 5 people inside it, right? That's what we're going to do so far. Okay, so once we've declared it, right, then the next thing that we need to do is to allow the user to capture as many runners and their finish times, right? So, right, I'm not going to do it the way I did it on the last tutorial, but you can implement what we did in the last tutorial revision session, right? You can implement that, create an input form, and then from that input form, you're going to ask the user how many times do they want to how many runners do they want to insert, and then they're going to choose the number, and then it's going to loop you're going to assign that to the array, and then it's going to loop that many times, right? In this case, I'm just going to keep it simple so that we don't confuse people, because there's a test on Monday, if I'm not mistaken, right? So we're just going to make it simple, and hopefully that clears some confusion if you were confused in the last tutorial. But please make sure that you watch the recording again, right? If you just to make sure that you understand this and practice this again, right? So I said here, what we're going to do is, right, they're going to click this button, and then a form will pop up, and then they're going to insert the details. So in this case, it's gonna pop up five times, because we have 5 runners that we instantiated our array, right? So let me create another form, right? So I'm gonna go to my solution name on the Solution Explorer, right click, then go to add, then I am gonna go to new item, right? And then I'm gonna look for window forms, right? And then once I find it, then I'm gonna change the form name. I'm gonna just say input form, right? Then click add, right? So now I've created the input form. Then what I want now is to say to get a label, right? Then once I get a label, I'm gonna change the label to runner name, right? And then I'll add a text box, right? And then once I add a text box, I'm just going to resize it. And again, we're doing this over code, right, in Visual Studio, but you'll be writing the test, by hand. So again, you need to understand what the algorithm is doing, not just typing and just saying, okay, no, I'm just going to cram the code. That doesn't work that way. You need to understand what is going on, so that when you see a question, you understand what it's saying to you, so that you can respond accordingly, right? Even if you don't get the syntax correctly, but you got the logic correctly, you will get the answer correct, right? Because of course, we're humans. You're not gonna know code, off by heart, whilst you're still learning it, right? It takes practice to then know it off by head. Then I'm gonna enter the times, right? So in order to make things simple, because now in terms of the times, it's we can either use a combo box, right? And then they're gonna select the time from 0, 1. sorry, from 12 o'clock up until no, not 12 o'clock, right? So we need to get the hours and minutes, right? So in terms of the hour, no, let's not use a combo box because that will limit us. So let's use two text boxes, right? To make it simple, because if we allow a user to just type in, the text, they can type in anything they want. So that's going to confuse us. You're not going to know which attribute it is that you want. So what I'm saying is I'm going to say hours, right? And then I'm going to have a text box for hours. They're going to type in the hours. Right? So they're going to have the hours. Then we're going to drag another label, right? And then we're going to name this minutes. Right? And then we're going to add the text box. Right? And then they're going to enter their minutes here, right? So that's what we want, right? We want the runner name, and we also want the hours and minutes. We don't want them to type it in within one text, because you're not going to be sure what they've typed in unless you force the user to enter a certain way. Maybe you show a label saying this is the format you want to when you're typing in the date and time. But to keep things simple, we're just gonna have these two text boxes, right? So that when they type in the hours here, we get the hours, and then when they type in the minutes, we get the minutes, right? Okay, so let's just see here. The time is stored in two separate variables, of course. As an extra challenge, store it in a single string variable and extracts the hours and minutes using string handling. Okay, so I mean, we can do that, right? When we store it into the code. I mean, what I'm saying is, like, for here in the code behind, right? We can just create one variable which is just going to store the time, but what we're gonna store it as a string, and then we're gonna extract that. I think I'm gonna do it that way, right? Because you did this in your prac, right? So let's create a string variable. Sorry, I mean, you did this before, so let's just try and switch it up, right, a bit. So again, I'm going to create a string I'm going back to my structure, right? And then I'm just changing the variable that I had for the hours and minutes, which was an int. Now I've changed it to a string, and then I'm just say hours and minutes, right? Which is a string. So we're going to have to extract this manually, but for our form design, we're going to separate the two so that we know which is which. And then we're just going to combine it together so that we can get the time, right? So okay, so once we've done that, so going back here, let's add a button to our input form, right? And then I'll just say confirm for the text property. Right, so once we're done with that, then we're gonna go back to form one, right, which is this form, right? And then for this form, I'm gonna say here, I'm gonna change the text property to enter runners, right? That's what I'm gonna type in there. Okay, so once I've typed in enter runners, then I'm gonna double click the button, right? And then once I've double clicked on it, let's see what we need to do. We need to allow the user, oh no, we need to capture the details, right? So let's get that. So what we're gonna do is Now again, the race array has 5 runners, right? So we need to capture all those 5 runners. So to do that, what we need to do is we're going to create a for loop, right? To loop through every item in the runner array, right? So I'm going to say int I is equal to 0, and I like using I. You can use any other variable name, but I stands for iterator anyway, so that's why I like using I. So then we're going to loop from 0, then we're going to end at we're going to end at 5, right? You can type in 5 here, or you can just type in race.length, right? That will return 5. Then I'm going to say I++, right? And then inside the for loop, right? That's where the magic is going to happen, right? So what we want to happen first when this loop runs, we want to show that form, right? But we want to show it as a dialog so that the code or the system waits for us to click the confirm button so that the form is hidden, the input form is hidden, and then it can continue doing the rest of the things, right? So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to create a copy of the input form. So I'm going to say input form, right? And then I'm going to give this new input form a name. Form input, right, is equals to new input form, open close brackets, semicolon, right? So now we've created a new copy of the input form. So now we can now show that input form, right? So I'm going to say input form dot show dialog, not input form, sorry, form input dot show dialog, right? So when you use the show dialog, it will appear and you can't go anywhere else, right, up until you finish doing what you're doing in the form input form or the input form, right? And then after that, it's going to continue with the code. Okay, so that's what that does when you show it as a dialog. So if you don't show it as a dialog, it will just continue doing everything. It's not going to wait for you to finish doing what you're doing in the form input form, right? So that's why I'm using show dialog. Okay, so I've declared the form, right? And then now I can then capture the details, right, that they've typed in that form, right? So what I want to do is I'm gonna say race, right, square brackets, right? Now I'm gonna be looping through each item, right, in the array, and then I'm gonna insert something to the array. So that's why I'm gonna put I, because that's the index, right, the number where I'm at within the array. So since there's 5 items, I represents that specific item that we're at using the loop, right? So if we're at index 0, so we're gonna see the first item in the race array, right? So the first thing that I want to capture from the race array is the runner name. So the runner name, I'm gonna get it from the input form, right? So for now, I can't really get access to the text boxes within the input form, right? So if I say form input dot text box, you see that there's no text box here, right? So what you need to do in that case, and you might see this in the test, so you need to make sure that you pay attention, right? So you need to go back to the form, the input form, right? And then select the control, right? This text box, right? In this case, we don't really want to change the label. But if you wanted to, you can select it, then scroll down under the design section, right, in your properties, look for a modifier. So it indicates the visibility level of the object. So I actually want the visibility of the objects to be public so that everyone can see it, or every form can see this label, right? Also, I'm going to do the same for the text box. I'm going to select it, go to the properties, look for modifiers, then change the modifier from private to public, right? Then just do the same for the rest of the objects in the form, right? So I'm going to change them to public so that they are visible throughout the project, right? And then I've changed it to public. Okay, now I can go back to form1.cs, right? From form1.cs, now I can say form input dot text box one, right? And then dot text. Now I've captured the runner name, right? So that's good. Okay, so with regards to the next one, which is so I'm going to say race square brackets at index I dot hours, minutes. Remember that hours and minutes now is a string, right? But if you use the first approach where you just separated them and they were integers, right? You were going to have to convert the answer here. So you're going to say int.parse, and then put the value inside it. But since now we know that hours and minutes is a string, we don't really need to worry about that, right? So, but now we had two text boxes for the hours and minutes here, right? So we're gonna have to concatenate the two into one, right? So what I'll do is I'll say, so I'm gonna say form input dot text box 2 dot text, right? Plus, then you're gonna leave a space, then I'm gonna use the inverted commas, then I'm gonna say colon, right, to separate the two, like as you would with the time. We're separating the values, and then we're gonna say form input, right, dot text box 3 dot text, semicolon. Right, so now we've captured the hours and minutes as one attribute, right? So that we have them. So we're gonna use some string handling using substring to extract the hours, and also we can extract the minutes, right? When we need the individual fields, right? But now we're storing them as just one field. Okay, so after we do that, let's add a try catch statement. So I'm gonna say try, right? And then the try is just gonna cover this part of the code, right? So try, and then I'm gonna say catch. It won't really get into an error in this case, but I'm just gonna add it, right? Just so that you remember, right, that you need to also if you don't want your application to crash in runtime, right, you need to use a try catch statement. And that's a very infamous question that you might see in the test, right? And don't ask me what's in the test, because I don't have any idea. Error, right? Incorrect format. And then if there's an error that occurs, right, we're just gonna set the loop to redo the step that was missed. So what I'm saying is I'm gonna say I is equal to I minus 1, semicolon, so that it redoes the step if it missed something, right? And then once that's done, maybe I can output a message box after the for loop, right? Message box.show, and then I'm gonna say finished answering runners. All right, so now we've captured our runners, right? So let's go back to the input form, right? So from the input form, what you want to happen is when you click this confirm button, right, you need to hide this form. So I'm going to say this dot hide, right, to hide the form. Open and close bracket, semicolon, right? That's going to hide the input form. And then once the input form hides, the code, right, it will move on from here, right? Then it will go to this part here. But if we haven't clicked confirm button, it's just going to stop here. It's going to wait for us to finish or click the confirm button. And then after we click it, then it's going to continue doing this. And if it finds an error, then this part will happen. It will show a message box. And then after, take the for loop backwards by 1, right? So that you can redo the inserting so that you can put the right values, right? Okay, so that's how we capture, right, the details. So now we've done the capturing, right? Then you're gonna calculate the average time taken to complete the race, right? So now we need to calculate that, right? And I'm hoping that everyone is with me up until this point. No one is left behind. If you are, you can just let me know. Someone is asking me, can you go over line 43 again? So let me just put it like this, right? So let's say the loop is at index it's at index it's at index 1, right? When it's at index 1, right, it's gonna go inside here, right? We're gonna insert the index 1 item, and then if we get an error, right, it's gonna go back here, right, and then it's gonna show this message, right, that there's an error. And then what it's gonna do here, it's gonna say 1 minus 1, which is what? 0, right? So then it's gonna go back here, right, to the for loop, right, and see what I is, right? I is 0, right, in that case. So it's just going to increment I plus 1. So to take us back to 1 again, like we didn't do it before, right? Once it's I is 1, then it's going to do this step again, right? And then continue if there's no error. But if there is an error, then you're just gonna minus 1 to redo what before you entered that index, right? So it's basically just going backwards and then going forward again by 1. I'm not sure if that made sense. But yeah, again, as I said, if the index is 1 and you're here, so it's going to be 1 minus 1, which is going to be 0. So when it loops out, right, it just goes straight to this I plus plus. So it's going to increment I plus 1 again. So I will be 1 again, and then it's going to loop through and try and insert, right? And then if there's no error, then it will move on. But if there's an error, it will still go back. It will reset the I back to 0, like it was running for the first time, right? And then increment I plus 1 to take it back to 1 so that you can reinsert your values, right? So I repeated that multiple times, right? So I hope that makes sense. And again, you can put a breakpoint, right, and run the application and then use the step into buttons, right, one by one. Maybe I'll show you this one time, right? But we're not going to be able to run into an error since we're using strings. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just put this code inside here, and then you can see it as we step into when we run. And let me just put it now, and then let's run the application so that you can see what I'm talking about. And then I'm just going to set the runner length, the runners to be, let me just enter 2, right? Because I don't want to take overdo this, right? So let's just run it. So I'm going to click enter runners. And then when I click enter runners, right, it's going to take me to the code behind, right? So now it's waiting for me to step into the next part, right? So I'm going to go here, which is the step into button, right? I is 0, as you're seeing here in the locals window, right? When I step into again, now it's looping for the same time. For the first time, I is 0. So it's gonna go inside and then it's gonna show the form, right, which is the input form, right? So it's initializing the form. So I'm just gonna continue stepping into, and then you end up seeing the form pop up. So let me just continue stepping into, because it's still setting up the form, right? So just do that, and then now the form will show, right? So now you're seeing the form is showing, right? So I'm gonna enter the runner name, and then I'm gonna enter the hours, the minutes, right? And then click confirm, and then now you'll see the button click method will happen, and then this form will hide, and then it will take us back to the form code, and then now we can do the try catch, right? And then now we're going to capture the runner name, right? As you can see, we've captured the runner name, right, which is Langa there. That's what we're capturing, right? And then let's step into again, you can see we capturing the hours and minutes, and we concatenating it like so, right? And then we then okay, there's another thing that I'm gonna have to edit here with the hours and minutes. So if there's like, if it's less than 10, right, 2, I want to put a 0 in between before the 2, so that when I extract the substring, I know that if there's only 2 characters, it's only going to take that. If there's multiple, then it's going to do something different. So I'll explain what I'm saying, right? So when we do it, so I'm going to continue stepping into, right? Remember that I is 0, right? So we just said here I minus 1, which is going to be minus 1 because I is 0, right? So when you minus 1, it's going to be minus 1, right? So let me step into again, right? And now it's going to go to the end of the for loop. So now the loop is going to loop through again. So what it's going to do, it's going to increment I plus 1, right? So I is minus 1 currently, as you can see. I is minus 1. The plus plus hasn't happened as yet. So when I click step into, that's when it's going to happen. So once I click step into, now I is 0, as you can see. And then it's going to see whether I is less than race.length, right? In this case, it is less than race.length. So now the for loop will run again, and you're seeing I is 0. So we're redoing the previous step, right? So it's like we haven't inserted the details here into the array, right? So let me stop there. So I hope that makes more sense, right? Okay, so we can go to the next step. So we need to calculate the average time taken to complete the race. So for that one, okay, we know we're gonna have to insert a button. Right? And then like last time, let's add a list box to just show outputs the average time to the list box, right? So I'm gonna say average completion time for the text property of this button. Right, and then let me just resize it. Right, So I'm gonna double click the average completion time button, right? Once I double clicked on it, then now I want to do the processing, right? So now to get the average time that is taken to complete the race, right? We need the to create two variables, which is the hours, the total hours and the total minutes, so that we can get all the hours in minutes, and then we can divide them accordingly so that we can get the value that we want, right? So to do that, then what I'll do is I'll just go wait, before I do that, let me just go back here, right, to this part here specifically, right? Because I want to change this here, right, to see what value it is. So what I'll do is I'll just write an if statement here. Okay, let me just create a string variable, and I'll show you what I'm trying to do. Sorry, an integer variable. So I'm gonna say minutes val is equal to int dot pass, open and close bracket, semicolon. Then I'll just say form input dot text box 3 dot text, right? And also I'm going to do the same for the hours, right? So int hour val is equals to int dot pass, open and close bracket, semicolon, and then I'm going to say form input dot text box 2 dot text. All right, so I've set it up like this, right? So then what I'll do is I'm going to create a string variable, and then I'm going to say hours string, and then I'm going to have it as an empty string, then again string, minutes string, right? Don't really have to do it this way. I'm just doing it because I foresee a problem, right? Right, so that's what I'm trying to solve here. So I'm gonna say string the time string, right? Okay, semicolon. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create an if statement, right? I want to check if the hour val is less than 10, right? If the hours is less than 10. If the hours is less than 10, what I want to do is I'm just going to take the hours string variable, right, that I created, and I will add a 0 before the hours. Then I'm going to say plus hour string, right? And then I'll have an else, right? And then in that else part, what I'll do is I'll say our string is equal to our string. So the else means that if they had a, sorry, this, I'm supposed to say our val dot to string, right? Open and close brackets, semicolon. Spelling is not correct, right? So I'm going to put a 0 if the hour is less than 10, and else meaning that the hour is greater than 10. Then I'll just, if it's greater than 10, then I'll just take it as it is. So I'm just say hour val dot to string, right? So that's the thing I'm trying to fix here. And then I'll do the same for the minutes, right? If the minutes val, right, is less than 10, right, and then we can say else, right, and then we can say here the minutes string is equal to, so if it's less than 10, meaning that it's from 0 to 9, right? Then we're gonna set minutes val. Sorry, we're gonna have a 0 before it, and then we're gonna say plus minutes val dot to string, open and close brackets, semicolon. Right. On the else part, then we're just gonna say min string is equal to minutes val dot to string, right? If the hours is greater than 10, so we're just gonna take it as it is, right? Once that's done, then we're just gonna take so we created a time string variable where now this time string variable will just take the hours string and then plus and add this colon in between, and then say plus minute string, semicolon, and then drop done, right? And then we'll just replace this, we'll remove this here that we inserting into the array, and then we'll just put in time string, right? And then we've solved the problem. So we're just going to assume, right? I'm not going to do anything further. We're just going to assume that the user will enter a time that is for the hours and minutes that is between 0 and 60, right? Or 0 and 59, right? They're not going to put in erroneous times, right? That's for later. I don't want to complicate things and waste time, right? Because it's unnecessary for this tutorial, right? So we've set that part up. Okay, so now we can go back here, right, to calculate the average completion time. So before I move on quickly, for those who haven't seen what I'm doing, right, created some, okay, we're taking the hours, right, from the form input, right, and converting them to an integer and storing them into an integer variable, both for the times, for the hours and minutes, right? So once we've done that, we also created some string variables for the hours, for the minutes, and then we created a time string variable, which is just going to contain the hours and minutes after we've done the processing. Firstly, we're going to check if the hours is less than 10, right? If it's less than 10, then we're just going to add a 0, right, to before the hour value, and then convert it to a string and then store it in the hour string variable. And then else, if the hours is greater than 10, then we're just going to take the hour val as it is and convert it to a string and store it in the hours string variable. And then we're also going to check for the minutes. If the minutes is less than 10, if it is less than 10, then we're going to add a 0 before it, right? Else, right, if our minutes value is greater than 10, then we're just going to take it as it is and store it as a string, right, into the min string variable. And then after that, we're just going to assign the hour string plus the colon plus the min string to the time string variable. And then we're just going to insert the time string variable to the array in the hours and minutes attributes of the array. All right, so now we've sorted the time for the hours and minutes, right? Okay, now we can go back to here, right, to get the average completion time. So to get the average completion time, right, as I said, we need to get the total hours and the total minutes first before we can do anything else. So let's start creating a variable. So it's an int total hours, right? And then I'm going to assign it to 0 by default. And then I'm going to create another variable, which is an integer. And then I'm going to call it total minutes, right? And then again, it's equal to 0, semicolon. Okay, so now I've gotten the two variables, right? So now what we want to do, we want to extract the total hours and minutes from the array, right? So to do that, then what we need to do is we're just gonna use a for loop, right? So we're gonna have to loop through all the items in the array, right, to see so that we can store them in the total hours and minutes attributes, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say int I is equal to 0, semicolon I is less than race dot length, right? Semicolon I plus plus, right? So inside the for loop, that's where now I want to capture the total hours in minutes. So I'm going to start with the total hours. So remember that now the array, right, we stored the hours and minutes together, right? We didn't store them separately. But if you did that separately, then it would be easier for you. So it's just a matter of adding that. So in our case, since now we use the string, we're going to have to use string handling to extract the hours, right? So to do that, so I'm going to call the race at index I, right, dot hours and minutes, right, dot substring, right, open and close brackets. And then inside the substring, it's going to ask me for the start index. So looking at the hours, right? So going back here, right? Looking at the hours, right? For the hours, we know that it starts at index 0, right? But there are two items within an hour. You know, since we did it here, right? We know that the length of the number of indexes, right, within the hours are 2, right? Because we could have like a 0 and then have the hour, right? Or we could have, if it's greater than 10, we have 2 digits, right? In that case. So that's what I'm saying, that we have 2 digits within the hours. So it's for the substring, it's going to ask us for the start index. The start index is 0 because that's the start, right? Or that's the first character. And then it's going to ask us for the length. In this case, again, as I said, we have 2 characters, right? Or 2 digits that we want from the hours. So that's why I'm taking the length is going to be 2 here, right? Obviously, you're going to get an error here because total hours is an integer. So we need to convert this to an integer. So what I'll do is I'll say int.parse, right? Open brackets, then I will just close the brackets inside it, right? I don't need to say dot to string here after substring because substring is actually a string, but you can do it, but it's redundant, right? Because again, this substring method returns a string, right? So yeah. And then I've just converted it into an integer. So now we've actually extracted the hours, right, from the race array, right? So let's do the same now for the minutes, right? So total minutes plus equals to, and then int, let me not start with the int.parse, let me start with the race, right? So that you can just see it, right? So race at index I, then I'm gonna get the hours and minutes, right? And then now I'm going to say dot substring, right, to get a part of the string, right? So inside the substring, it's going to ask us for the start index. So let me just go up here. So the hours, right, we said that it's 2 digits, right? So 0, 1, right? And then this colon is number 3. Sorry, is number 2, or is the third character, or the index of it is 2, right? That's the index. And then the min string, it's at index 4. Again, 0, 1, that's for the hours, and then 2 is the colon, and then index 3 is the first digits of the minutes. So now we're going to say the start index is index 3, right? In this case, and then I'm going to say comma, and then it's going to ask me for the length. In this case, the length is 2. So the full string, right, this here would contain 6, no, is it 5 characters? So let me just count it. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it contains 4 indexes, but it's 5 items, right? It's 5 items, but it ends at index 4. Yes, that's what I was trying to say. It's 5 characters, but there's 5. Yes, there's 5 characters, but there's 4. It ends at index 4. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Okay, so yeah, we're starting from index 3, and then also we're saying 2, so meaning that we're taking index 3 and 4, right? Which is the minutes. So then we can convert it to int.parse, right? And then close brackets, right? So now we've gotten the total hours and total minutes. So in your case, if you did it the other way, where you separated the hours and minutes, right? Well, you were just going to get the hours here, and then you were just going to get the minutes, right? You weren't going to do the substring thing, right? Because if you had the hours as an integer, right? So yeah, unless you had the hours as a string, then you're just going to convert it here, right, and add it to the total hours, and then do the same for the total minutes, right? But that example is unlearned, so you can just focus on that one if you want to do it that way. So since we're doing it this way, it's fine as long as the thing works, right? And it's good to understand how to use string handling, because you're going to see it in the test, right, one way or another. But make sure that you go over, the prex and read the scope in terms of what you need to cover. Okay, so let me continue with what I'm doing, right? So what we're gonna do now, we are gonna check something, right? So we've added the total hours and minutes, right? So we are gonna see what we're gonna do is we're gonna check if the semicolon, the total minutes, right, is greater than or equals to 60. Right? If it is for the total minutes, right, if it is greater than or equals to 60, then what we'll do is we'll just take in the total hours, right, and then we'll just add 1 to it to add an hour, right? And then for the total minutes, right, we'll just say total minutes minus equals to 1, right? So, sorry, we'll minus 60. We're going to minus the 60, right? So that we have a coherent thing, right? So now that we've captured the hours and minutes, then the next thing that we need to do, right? We need to then calculate, the average time, right? And we're going to output it, right? So we're going to say int.parse, sorry, not int, dot parse. So we're going to create a variable, an int, right? So I'm going to call it average time, right? And then the average time variable, what it contains, right, or what we're going to do in this, right? We are going to try and get the average time as a whole, right? So that involves so I'm going to open brackets. Inside the brackets, I'm going to type in the total hours, right? And then I'm just going to multiply it by 60, right? So let me put it in its own brackets. I'm going to multiply it by 60. And then once I've multiplied it by 60, then I'll just say plus total minutes, right? Once I've gotten the total minutes, then I can just divide the hours, right, by the length of the race. So by the number of items in the race array, right? So race.length, semicolon. All right, so that is how we would get the average time, right? And then once we've gotten the average time, the next thing that we want to find out, what is the average hours? Right, so what is the average hours? We can say the average hour is so it's the total hours, right? No, not the total hours. It's actually the average time, right? So we're going to use the average time to get the average hours, right? So to do that, we're going to say the average time divided by 60 because, 60 minutes is an hour. So that's why we're doing it this way, right? So that's how we would get the average. And then then we're going to get the average minutes. So average minutes, then we're going to say equals to average time modulus 60. So average time, it's like average time plus 0.6, like it's similarly to that. So we're getting the modulus, right, of 60 minutes to get the average time. All right, to get the average minutes, sorry. So once we got in the average minutes, then we actually now want to output, this. So let's output it into the list box, right? So I'm gonna say list box one dot items dot add open and close bracket semicolon. Then I'll just say average time, right? And then I'm gonna say list box dot items dot add and open and close bracket semicolon. So in terms of the displaying, the message with the hours and minutes, right? So what we can do is we can say, or maybe we can, okay, no, it's fine. What we can say is, I'm going to say average hours, right? Dot to string, open and close brackets, semicolon, not semicolon, plus inverted commas, and then inside the inverted commas, I'm going to put a colon, then I'm going to say plus, then I'm going to say average minutes dot to string. Open and close brackets, semicolon, right? So now we've captured the average minutes, right? You could also just output this into a message box, right? If you wanted to. Let's just run it and see what it looks like. I think I changed the number of individuals to 2, if I'm not mistaken. So in terms of the hours that they ran, let's say they ran 2 hours and 56 minutes, right? And then I'm gonna confirm. Then I'm gonna put in the next one, Jack. Then they ran 3 hours and 40 minutes, right? And the 50 minutes. Then I'm gonna click confirm and then finish entering runners, right? And then Now I want to get the average completion time. So let me click on average completion time. And when I click on it, you can see it's 3,23. So like 3 hours, 23 minutes, right? So that's that, right? Also, you could output it if you wanted to output it like this, hours and minutes. So you could just say you could just say, so let me just see it again. Okay, you could just say here, put in inverted commas. So we're gonna say hours, then leave a space, then a plus average minutes, and then plus, then leave a space, then say minutes. Right, so it's gonna work the same way. So check 2 hours, 3 minutes, right? Then confirm. Right, and then I'm gonna put in the hours. Right, then click confirm, finish entering numbers, then click confirm, and you can see 2 hours, 29 minutes, right? Also, yeah, let me just leave a space here. So yeah, that's how you get the average time, right? Okay, so now we've gotten the average time to complete the race, right? Then we need to output the gold, silver, and bronze medalists, right? So let's add a button. Right, and for this button, I'll just say medalist. Right, and then I'll just double click the code, right? The button, right? The medalist button, right? So now we want to see who got gold, who got silver, and who got bronze, right? So that would involve us going through all the items, right, in the array, right? And then once we loop through all the items in the array, then we can kind of make sense, right, of what we want to do. So I'm gonna use a for loop, right? So I'm gonna say int I is equal to 0, semicolon, I is less than race, right, dot length, right, semicolon, I plus plus. Then inside the for loop, right, so we're gonna have, in order for this to work, we're gonna have to use a loop within a nested for loop, right? So we're gonna have a loop within a loop so that we can compare, right? We can compare the hours and minutes, right? It's gonna be more simple to be able to compare, right? And then once we compare, we can actually see, right, who is who and who is who, right? Or like what we're gonna simply do, we're just gonna reorder the array, right, to only contain, to be ordered, right, from 1 up until 3, right? So then we know that these are the, the gold medalists and the bronze medalist and the bronze medalist and silver medalist. So that's what we're doing. So let's put another loop here, and then I'm gonna say int j, right? Because now I can't use the same looping index because it's gonna conflict, because it's a loop within a loop, right? So it's I is gonna be accessible here, but you can't access j from here, right? Yeah. So if you have a loop within a loop, you don't name them the same name because it's going to confuse your application. It's going to actually give you an error and tell you that you've made a mistake, right? So I'm going to say race.length, which is the race array dot length, right, semicolon I plus plus. Then inside the for loop, right, now this is where the magic happens, right? So firstly, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create the variables, right? I need to create the variable, and I think I'm gonna have to create it here because I want to compare the values, right? So remember that I had the hours and minutes as one attribute, so it's going to be difficult to compare. So we need to extract these values on their own, right? So I'm going to say our hours index so that I understand it. Right? So I'm just going to say index hours index so that I remember that, okay, this is the hours for the index right? Then I'm just gonna say race at index right? Dot hours and minutes, right? And then dot substring, right? So we're gonna extract the hours and minutes here, and you'll see what I'm doing when we actually do it, right? So for this here, the substring, again, I said that we're going to start at index 0 for the hours, comma, the length is going to be 2, right? Because there are 2 items, and then we need to convert this to an integer, right? So int.parse, open brackets, and then close the brackets at the end, right? So we've gotten the hours for index I. Let's do the same for the minutes at index I is equal to int.parse. I mean, there are multiple ways in which you can do and solve the problem, right, of this projects, right? As long as you understand the logic, right, you're not restricted when you're coding that you need to code one specific way, unless it's a written test. But like if you're coding, there are multiple ways in which you can solve problems, right? It just depends on how you solve it and whether you're understanding the logic, right? So I made a mistake. Oh yeah, no, I didn't make a mistake. It's hours and minutes dot substring and then open and close bracket. So the starting index for the substring, we're going to start at index 3 because, again, to reiterate that, you know, the hour string and the minute string have 2 digits, right? And then in between it is another character, which is a colon. So 2 plus 1 plus 2 is 5, right? That's 5 characters. So in terms of the index, if you're starting from 0, we don't exclude 5, we end at 4. So the first 2 digits is going to be 0 and 1. And then this colon is going to be index 3, right? And then min string is going to start at index 4, right? Actually, this is index 2, right? The colon, and then the min string is going to start at index 3, and then it's going to stop at index 4, right? There's a query on the chat. Where did we stipulate that they each have 2 characters? Here. Remember that we did this if statement here, where we checked if the hour is less than 10, right? If it is less than 10, we add a 0 before it so that we have 2 characters that is stored under the hours, right? And then we also did the same for the minutes, right? We added 2 characters. If the digits is greater than 10, right, then we're just going to take it as it is, because we know that the hours is going to be less, the hours and minutes are going to start from 0 and stop at 59, right? So that's why we adding the 0 at the beginning, so that we know that it has 2 digits, so that we don't have any errors when we try to extract the hours and minutes from the array. Okay, so now I'm gonna go back here. So as I said, Oh yes, thank you for the for that. I made a mistake here. I shouldn't have said I. It should be J plus plus. Yeah. So we're starting at index 3, right? And then we're gonna say comma, the length is gonna be 2 again, right? So now we've gotten the hours and minutes for index I, right? So let's do the same thing for index J. So I'm just gonna copy the same code, right, and paste it inside here. And then I'm going to change it, right? I'm going to say J in hours at index J. And then here I'll also change I and put J, J in small letter. And then also here I'll put J and then I'll change the name also there to J, right? So once you've done this, right, now you have properly done the steps. So now we can continue inside the J for loop, right? So inside it now, we need to compare the hours from index I with the hours from index J, right? And then depending on what we see, then we're going to do what we're supposed to do. So what I'm saying is we're going to say if, open brackets, right? The hours at index J, at index I, right, are less than the hours at index J, right? If they are less than that, then what we're going to do is, right, we are going to have to then swap the records, because what we're trying to do here, we're trying to reorder the array so that it's in descending order. It starts with the highest hours and minutes and ends with the lowest hours and minutes. That's what we're doing, right? So now we, again, as I said, we're checking if the hours at index I, right, is less than the hours at index J, right? If it is the case, then what we're going to do is we're going to have to swap the records. So to swap the records, let's create a variable, right? I'm going to call it, it's going to be of type runner, right? So I'm going to call it temp, because it's going to be like a temporary variable that we're going to be storing that specific hour. And actually I'm just thinking, okay, I'm just thinking in terms of this. In terms of how we're gonna order it, because yeah, we wanna store the time. Now the complicated part is that we're using a string, right? Because I'm thinking that what I was gonna do is I was just gonna say the hours, right? And then at index, the hours at index J, right? But that isn't gonna work the way that I want. But what I can do is I can just say race at index at index I, right? Let's just store that, because that's that index there. And then we can just say dot hours and minutes, right? Like so. But then again, it won't because the reason is because of this hours and minutes, right? So I should just take the race at index I and then store it under runner, because now it's containing the hours and the minutes and the name of the race. So I'm storing the race at index I, so I'm getting the value from here, right? And then what I'll do is after that, right, because I'm confusing myself. That's why this thing I was thinking maybe it's not gonna work the way I want it to work. So it still can work the way that we want. So let's do this, right? So we're just gonna say now race at index I, right? And then it's gonna be equals to race at index J. Yeah. So that's what I was trying to do. We're trying to replace, right, to reorder the array in descending order. So that's why I was kind of stuck, because I was confusing myself, and it happens. So it's not something out of the ordinary, right? So now what we did, right, we as I said, right, let's say we are at index I, right, we are at position 0, right? We're going to create a temporary runner, right, that is there, which is going to contain all the details of that runner. So we're taking that runner at index I, right, and restoring it as a temporary variable. Once we've stored it, then we're going to replace, right, what is at index I with what's at index J, right, which is, let's say, for example, we are at index J, we are at index 2, right? We're going to replace it with that, right? And then once we replace it, what we want to do now is that whatever was in index J, right, that we placed in index I, we're going to place it in index. So we're going to place it, no, we're going to place temp to it, right, to overwrite it. And then we've solved the problem. So here, we swapped, so let me just type a comment. We swapped what was in race index I with what was in index J, right? So that's what's happening. But maybe you might be confusing, how is this happening? Because I'm not understanding how the code runs, right? So for example, what is going to happen, this for loop is going to run, right? We're going to be at index 0, right? It's going to do this, create these variables, right? And then once it creates them, it's going to go to this for loop, right? So this for loop will have to run from 0 up until the race.length, and then do its processing. After it's finished, then it's going to loop out and go to index 1. And then it's going to do the same thing here, then go to this inner loop and loop through all the items from index 0 up until race.length. And then after it's done, then it's going to go back up to this outer for loop. Then it's going to be at index 2, right? Then do the same thing again, then loop through from 0 up until the race.length, right? And then once it's done, then it's going to be at index 3 now. So that's what's happening, right? Okay, so now that we've gotten that, right, we've swapped, right, the runner, that we created a temporary runner, right, and then we stored the whole item, right, that is in at index I, right? We stored it under the temporary runner. And then we so again, when we're storing a temporary runner, we basically, what it's saying, that it's just taking in the runner name and the runner hours and minutes, right, as they are, right, at that specific index, right? So that's what is happening here, right? And then we just copy what's at index J to index I, and then we take what was in index J, right? We overwrite it with what we had at index I. So if we had something after index I, right, we overwrite index I, then we take what was at index I and we move it backwards after index I, right? So that we sort them in descending order. All right, so there's not much I can do with re-explaining it. Maybe I can re-explain it when the code is running in step by step, but I'm hoping that you're seeing some of it, right? So what then in the case where the hours at index I, right, is equals to at index j, we also need to put in an else if, right, so that we can also handle that. Okay, so if the hours are the same, right, then we also now need to compare the minutes so that we can see how long are the minutes, and then depending on the minutes, then we can order them by the minutes, right? That's what we're doing now. So I'm gonna say hours at index I, right, is equals to hours at index j, right? If that is the case, then what we're gonna do is we are gonna then compare the minutes, right? Because now we already know the hours, right? So with the minutes, oh yeah, we did create the variables for the minutes. So we're gonna open brackets, right? And then I'm gonna say minutes index I, right, is less than the minutes at index j, right? If they are, right, less than, then we're going to do the similar thing that we did earlier, where we said that we're going to create a runner variable, a runner type variable, which is going to be a temporary variable, which is going to store the race, right, at index I, right? It's just going to store that index. So if you index 0, we're going to store that runner there, right? And then once we've created a temporary variable, then what we're going to do, we're going to go to race at index j and then replace that value with the race at index I, right? And then after we've replaced the race at index I, right? I think I did it the opposite way. I'm supposed to be saying here index I, then I'm supposed to saying here j, right? Because I want to replace index I with what's at index j. And then once I've replaced what was at index I with index j, then now I'll replace what's at index j with the temporary variable that we created, right? And then now we've solved the swapping, right? We've done the swapping, right? So again, just to add a comment, we compare the minutes, right? Then we swap. Right? We're swapping the indexes. That's what we're doing. Okay, so after we've done this, we're actually now done with the swapping and ordering and stuff. So now we can actually output this. So let's output it to the list box, right? You can also use a message box if you want to. I'm just going to use a list box, right? But this time I'm not going to be styling it, right? To using the formatting. It's fine. We don't really need to do that. You can just go over your notes using zoning and that stuff, right? So let's start with the output. So I'm just going to say meta lists. Oh, firstly I need to clear the list box. So list box items dot clear, open and close bracket, semicolon, right? And then I'm going to say meta lists, right? And then again I'm going to say list box items dot add, then open and close bracket, semicolon, right? Then I'm gonna have a comma, and then I'm just gonna say gold, and then leave a space there, and then I'm gonna say plus, right? Now I wanna put in the runner that got gold, so I'm gonna say race dot not dots, at index 0, because that's the first race, dots, runner name, right? So that's the first runner who got the best time, right? Yeah. And then I'm gonna say list box 1 dot items dot add. I think I pressed a shortcut key. That's why that was popping up. But add, then I'm gonna say silver, right? And then for silver, I'm gonna say plus, then I'm gonna say race at index 1 dot runner name, right? So that's the second runner who got silver. Then list box items dot add, open and close bracket, semicolon. Then this is bronze, right? And I'm gonna say plus, then race at index 2 dot runner name, right? So now we've gotten our runners, right? This part was a bit challenging, right? Because we did it differently, because we weren't using integers for the hours and minutes. We had to firstly extract it, and then after we extracted it, then we can do the various comparisons, and then we swapped the runners, right, depending on their hours that they made the time. Also, we compared where the hours were equals to the hours, right? Then what we did, we just used the minutes to compare them, right? So yeah. Okay, so let's run it. And then I'm going to enter the runners. In my case, I just set it to 2 runners because to save time, right? You can add more, right? Let me just add that, right? And then I'm going to confirm, and then the average completion time, right? And then we can click on medal list. Oh, for them, you're going to get an error because this year, right? If the index was out of bounds, right? So let me just add 3. I just forgot about that. That we need like 3 individuals in the race so that we can be able to check, right? So let me just change the array to accept 5, right? Because now we're just running it for the final time, right? So let's just answer the people. Right, and make sure that you enter the details in a correct format, right? So that you're just gonna reduce errors. So I'm just entering them. All right, so we finished entering the runners, then the average completion time, and then now we can click the medalist, and then you can see the Kanyele, Kwezi, and Jack. So it returns from the lowest time, and then the highest time, so sorry, it's in ascending order, not in descending order. I made a mistake earlier, because it gets the lowest time, and then it gets the second lowest, and then the third lowest, right? Up until it gets to the highest at the end, right? So we can see that this aspect of the code worked accordingly. Right. So that was that exercise. We're not really done yet. There's this one last exercise here, which is a bit challenging, but it's not a lot of code that we, okay, it kind of is a lot of code, but let's do it quickly, and see where we are. And for those who are still with us, you can stick around. For those, if you have to go because you have another session, you can exit the session. Let's just finalize this last one. And I thought I was sending the register on the chat. I remember that I copied some of my code from my window, and as I was typing. So let me share the register. Make sure that you've signed that. All right. So for question 2, you have been given the following data for a timetable for a new day primary school. Each column represents the grade, in this case from 1 to 5. Each row represents the period for the day. There are 7 periods in the day. The timetable illustrates the timetables for grade 1 to 5 on a single day, right? So you have a grid view here, right? Where there's 5 grades and there is 7 periods, right? So for the questions below, you may exclude the first column and the first row, as these can be used as heading. Sorry, as these are heading. So this here, the first columns, right? The first column, which is this one, and also the first row, right? You just ignore them because they're used for reference purposes, right? You are required to develop a timetable analysis application based on the following specifications, right? So you're going to have to create a 2-day array which must be stored to represent the timetable. Each cell must store initials of the teacher. The user must be allowed to capture the teacher initials into the timetable. The application must output the number of clashes for each period in the timetable. A clash occurs when a teacher is allocated to more than one grade. So for this one, it's gonna be, what we're gonna do is, because we want to save time, right? We're just gonna create a 2D array, right? And then we're just gonna initialize it with these initials, right, that are here. Again, we'll just do that, but we can add another aspect of a form where the user can insert manually, but that's going to take quite some time. So I don't want to do that right now because we are running out of time, because we have other sessions to attend at too, right? So we're just going to insert these variables into the 2D array, and then once we've inserted them, then we are gonna call the different methods to do this, right? I don't think you will be tested on a complex application like this, but you will be tested like on 2D arrays, right? So that's something you will see, right? But it won't be like a big example like this, right? So instead of creating another form, okay, no, let's create another project, because it's another one. It's task 2. So I'm just going to create a new project. Then I'm just going to say ISTN 212 revision task 2, right? And then I've already saved it in the correct folder, so I'm just going to click OK. Right, so once I've created that, then what I'll do is I'm going to look for a grid view, right? So let me look for a grid view. data grid view. So let's just add that. And then I'm not going to do anything as yet. So let me just resize it, right? We're not going to do anything as yet. So let's click on view code. And then we're going to go to the backend, right? So that we can do the processing that we want, right? So it's said here that so we need to create a 2D array, right? Which must be stored to represent this timetable here. Each cell must store the initials of the teacher, right? So this timetable contains the columns, right? So starting with the rows, right? 7 rows, and it has 5 columns, right? So to put that into code, right, and making a 2D array, right, we can just say, and it contains initials which are strings. So let's just save it as a string array, and then we're gonna open the square brackets, right? Inside the square brackets, make sure you put in the comma to show the code that this is a 2D array, right? So I'm going to call this time table, right, is equal to new string, and then open square brackets, and then inside it, I'm going to put the comma. So in terms of the rows, right, we said that there are 7 rows and there are 5 columns. So there are 7 periods, 5 grades, right? So now we've declared our array, right, which contains 7 rows and 5 columns. Okay, so after declaring it, what I'll do is, as I said, I'm not gonna use a form, right? I'm not gonna create a form for inputs. Like, you can do that for your own exercise, right, to train yourself. Or maybe we'll look at it at the end. But for now, we'll just manually add these things here, all of this that you're seeing, right? We're just going to manually add it to the array because it's going to take some time to input the values, right, manually using a system. But we're going to add that aspect, right? But we're not going to use it, right? So I'm going to double click the title bar here. Right, once I clicked on it, it's going to create the form load method. So this is going to happen when the form loads, right? So I'm going to say timetable, right? I'm going to call my timetable array, right? Then I'm going to say square brackets, right? The row that I want to edit is row 1, and then the column that I want to edit is column 0, right? And then I'm going to type in the initial, right? So let me just move this here to one side of my no. I want to move this here to one side of my screen and then Visual Studio to the other screen, right? So that I see what I'm trying to do, right? So the first initial, right, for row 1 is AJ, right? So let's just type AJ. Right, and then for timetable at row 0, right, at index 1, which is grade 2, right, is equals to FDK semicolon, right? So you're gonna have to bear with me, right, because this is gonna be quite a long process, but let's do that for these things so that you can see that the code works. So again, row 0, column 2, or index 2, which is this here, grade 3, right? And then that's gonna be, so let me just hide this. So that's gonna be AK, right? And then the next one, I'm gonna say timetable, then 0, comma 3, right? Which is now we're at grade 4, right? So let's add FDK, semicolon, right? And then, oh, one last one, which is FO, right? That's appearing there in grade 5 for row 0. So row 0 at index 4, column 5, right? So index 4. So index 4 contains FO, semicolon, right? So that's the first row, right, that we just dealt with here. That's the first row that we added. So let's go to the second one. Maybe I won't do all of them. Let me just do the second one, and then I'll just continue with the rest of the code for your own practice. You can add the rest of the rows, right? Because it's quite a long number of thing that we're gonna have to go through, right? So this is gonna be index 1, right? And so now we're going to row 2, right, which is index 1, and then I'm gonna start at the first grade, right? So that's gonna be AK, right? What comes after AK? 47. But in this case, we're not using an AK-47, right? So the row is 1, and then the column is column 1, which is grade 2, right? And then it's equals to SS, right, semicolon, then again timetable, square brackets, 1, because we are at row 1, row 2, right, or index 1. Then we're gonna be at index 2, or the third grade, right, which is gonna be ZT, and then semicolon. Okay, no, we're gonna have to insert everything, because now if we don't, when we run the code, we will have an error, right? Because it's missing because of the array, because we said 7. Unless we change the column to 2, right? Then it won't arrive or get an error, right? So yeah. What's after ZC? FO, right? And then I'm gonna say timetable, square brackets, row 2 at index 1, right? And then we're gonna say the fifth grade is equal to AJ, semicolon, right? So that's the second row, right? So it's just doing the same process again and again and again. So just to save time, right, instead of writing this manually, so I'm just going to copy it once, right? I've just copied this one, and then I've pasted it here, right? So I'm just going to change the number to 2, to 2, 2, and then 2, so that I don't have to retype this over and over and over again. So I can just focus on typing in these values, right? So this one is FDK, right? So FDK, then it's AJ, then it's SS, then it's AJ again, then it's FO, right? So that's the third row. Let's copy this again, and then gets the fourth. So 3, 3, 3, 3, and then 3, right? So then once you've gotten the third one, right, now we're gonna insert the values. So for row 4, you can see it starts with FDK, then SS, then AJ, then AK, then FO, right? Okay, we've gotten that. Then I'm gonna copy and paste this again, paste it here. Then now it's gonna be index 4 or row 5. Excuse me. And then once we've changed it, right, to row 5, then it's FDK, then it's SS, then it's AJ, then it's SS, right? Then it's AK. Right, so we're done with row 5. Then now we can move on to row 6. Right, we're almost there. So so change that to 5, that's 5, that's to 5, that's to 5, and that's to 5. Right, and then now for row 6, at column 0, column 1, right, it's AJ, then it's SS, then it's FO, then it's FDK, then it's AK, right? And then let's copy this again one last time, and then I'm gonna paste it. So that's gonna be number 6, number 6, number 6, number 6, and number 6, right? And then change it. Well, we have AJ, then we have SS, then we have FDK, then we have FO, right? And then we have AK. All right, so now we've declared the variables that we needed to declare, right, on the array, right? Once we've declared them, right, then the array contains now this timetable now. Okay, so we've done the first part, right, of creating an array, initializing it, and then after initializing it, we store the teacher initials on each cell, right, in the array. Well, we store them when the form loads, right, when the application runs for the first time, right? So once we've done that, then the user must be allowed to capture the teacher initials into the teacher timetable, right? We can do that after. Let's just finish that. We're just going to skip that because it's not really necessary that we do it, because we've already been given the sample data. So let's just do that, and it would take some time to, but we can add that functionality, right? So the application must output the number of clashes for each period in the timetable, right? So that's what we want, right? To output the clashes within the timetable. All right. So again, we can just do all of that when the form loads, right? Before anything happens. Right. So to make things simple, right, let's create this here. So let's add a button. I'm just thinking whether I should call the method. Okay, no, we're not gonna call it when the form loads. Let's just click a button, right? And then once you click that button, then it will ask you, well, you just be clicking check for clashes, and then it's gonna check for a clash and then output a message, right? If it finds a clash. So check for clash. Right, and then I'm gonna double click this button, right, and then this way, okay, now I can expand this window, right? So for the button click method, right, that's where we're gonna do the magic. But let's create a method, and then we're gonna call this method on this button, right, to make things simple. So we're gonna create a public void method, right? So it's not going to be returning anything, right? It's just going to be doing what it's doing, and then output a message, right? So we're going to say check for clashes, right? Open and close brackets. It doesn't have any parameters, right? So inside the method, right, this is where we need to do the magic, right? So for the rows, right, so for the for loop, right, we're gonna say for int I is equal to 0, then semicolon I is less than, in this case, I'm just going to say 7 because for the, to get the length, right, with this, it might work, but just trying to avoid that. I mean, I've never used what is this? I've never used a 2D array, right? And using a for loop, right? So I've never really used it like this, but I'm assuming that the length would focus on the row value. I think it would, right? But if it gives us something else, then I could just wait. Let me just say here so that I can see it, because I'm expecting it to return 7. So dots length semicolon. Oh yeah, because it's an int, so you need to say dot to string at the end, right? Let me run it. I just want to see something, whether it's going to return 7, right? If it returns 7, then it should be fine. If it returns 35, well, that's the number of items, but I don't want it to return the number of items. I want it to return the rows. So I think for this one, because it's a 2D array, then you would say then now I think it should be rank or something, but I'm looking for, it doesn't have the rows. So yeah. Okay. I'm just going to put in 7 because I don't want it to, because I'm not sure, right? I haven't used 2D arrays for, getting the length like this. Yeah, so no, that rank is not going to work. So yeah, as I said, I'm just going to use the length, right, as it is, because I'm not sure to get the value that I want. Anyways, right? Let's do that. So I can just say 7 here to save myself the trouble, right? Because I know I know the column, right? But if again, I could have just created a variable, an integer, and then called it column, and then instead of putting 7 here, I just put column, and then I call that variable here. It's the same thing, right? So don't worry about that. Maybe I can search on the internet how do you get the column number from a 2D array. That would make more sense. Okay, so what you're gonna do is now you are gonna loop through the array, right? So we want to loop through the 2D array so that we can see if there's a clash, right? So for that, let's start with something, right? We're gonna create a variable for to keep track of the row clashes, right? Before we start doing the processing, right? This is the value that we're just gonna increment, and this is how we're gonna know that there's a clash, right? So for that, let's say row clash. All right, and then I'm gonna initialize it to 0, right? And then now I'm gonna create like we did in in the previous example where we loop through all the items, right, in an array, right, so that we can do the processing that we want, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say for open brackets, right? Inside the brackets, we're going to say int I is equal to 0, and then not I, sorry. let's say column, let's say C1, right? So like column 1, right? And then we're gonna start at index 0, right? From column 0. And then semicolon, then we're gonna say C1, right, is less than or equals to 3, right? So, which is the number of indexes. So from grade so from grade 1 up until grade which is this grade 3, no, grade 4, right? And you'll see why we're doing this, right? So then we are gonna say semicolon and then say C1 plus plus, right? And then once we've done creating the for loop, right? Then what now we're gonna have to do the next bit of the for loop that is inside the for loop, right? So we're gonna say for open brackets int C2 is equal to, now the trick with C2 is that we're gonna start from C1, wherever C1 is, we're gonna start there, right? And then we're gonna say C2, right, is less than or equals to 4. Why am I saying 4? 4 is the column, right? Which is we have 5 columns, right? So we want to look through all the 4 columns, right? And then we're going to say semicolon, then say C2 plus plus. I think I should have said here C2 plus 1 so that it gets the value after C1, right? Not C1 exactly, the value after C1, right? So now that we've gotten that, right, what we need to do now is then check if to check the values from the array, right, if they match. So what I'm saying is that I'm gonna say if timetable, right, at index I, right? So the first for loop here is the rows, is for the rows, right? We have 7 rows, so that's why we have 7 there. So it's gonna look from 0 up until 7, and then this here, these inner for loops are for the rows. So sorry, for the columns, right? So that's what that is, right? So I said that we want the table at index I, right, comma the first column, right? If the first column of the timetable at index I, right, is equal to the timetable, right, at index I, but in column C2, right, then if it is equal, then what we're going to do is we're just going to register that as a class, right? So we're going to say row clash plus equals to 1. So we found a clash in that sense, right? So after we found the clash, then we're also going to have to output that clash, right? To show the user that we found a clash. So we're gonna output this message within the row for loop, right? So each row is gonna go through all the columns in that particular row, right? And then compare the previous item, right, in the column with the item following it, right? And then see if they are the same, right? If they're not the same, then it's not going to register it as a clash. But if they are the same, right, then it's going to register it as a clash. Right, then we're gonna run so we're gonna show the message, right, if there's an error. So I'm going to say message box.show and then semicolon. So what I want to output here is the row, right, and the clashes that we had for that row. So I'm gonna say for period something, right? So for period something, so I'm gonna say I dot to string, open and close brackets, right? If for that row, right, or that period, right, or for period one, this is the number of clashes. So let me put a colon, sorry, and then I want to leave a space after that. Then I'm gonna say plus. Then now I'm gonna say row clash dot to string. All right, so this will just output the clashes, right, that it finds into a message box, right? So we can just call this method check for clashes here in the button click method, right? So we can just say check for clashes, open and close bracket, semicolon, right? And then that would run every time we click that button. It would check for a clash and then output a message, right? Let's run it to test, right? So when I click check for clash, you can see period 0, 1 clash. When I loop, it's gonna keep looping 7 times, and it's if it doesn't find the clash, then it's gonna say there's no clash. Period 2, there's 1 clash. Period 3, there's 0 clash. Period 4, there's 1 clash. Period 5, no clash. Period 6, no clash, etc. So yeah, I think it ended at period 6, right? Oh wait, let me run it again. Oh yeah, no, it's fine. I thought it had an error, so it's fine. It should end at 6, right? What we should do here actually with this let me open the brackets between the I and thing, and then I'm just gonna say I plus 1, right? So that when I run it, when I click check for class, it starts at period 1, right? And then goes on. So it should end at period 7, right? And so we fixed it. Okay. So that's the clashes, right? How you check for clashes, right? So after this, right, I actually wanna output the details to here, right, to the grid view, so that you can see the times, right? So I'm gonna go back to the form load method. Just after it, right, I'm gonna then create a for loop where I'm gonna loop through all the rows, and then for each row, right, I wanna add the rows to the data grid view, right? So I'm gonna say here for open brackets, and then inside it, I'm just gonna say int I is equal to 0, and is equal to 0, semicolon, I is less than 7 because there are 7 rows, semicolon, I plus plus, right? So inside the for loop, right, that's where I want the magic to happen, right? So we want to create okay, so again, we want to insert to this data grid view, right? However, we have our data stored in an array. So to do that, what we need to do firstly, we need to create a data row object, right? Where we're gonna store the data onto it, right? And then we're gonna add that row to the data grid view. So you'll see what I'm talking about now, right? So I'm gonna say data grid view. So I'm gonna have to say grid view row, right there. That's a grid view row, right? And then I'm just gonna call it row, right? And then it's gonna be equals to new data grid view row, open and close brackets, semicolon. So we've just created a new data grid view row, a copy or an instance of a data grid view row, right? That we can edit to our liking, right? So after we created an instance, right, of a row, right, then we can just create the row, right, to the create the row to the data grid view. So we can just call the method which creates cells, right? So what it will do, it'll just clear existing cells and set their templates according to the supplied grid view templates, right? So that's what it's doing. So inside the brackets, you need to mention that specific data grid view that you're editing. In this case, I actually want to edit data grid view 1. So there's data grid view 1, right? Then semicolon, right? So after it created the cells and linked them to the styles of data grid view 1, right? Then the next thing that we need to do is to actually populate, the rows, right? So to populate the rows, we are going to have to then do the function right inside here. So we're going to have to use a for loop because that's what we're going to have to do. So I'm going to say int j is equals to 0. So it's going to start, actually, I shouldn't say j. I'm going to say c, or maybe say col, right? So that you can see what it's a column, right? So the column should be less than 5, right? Because we have 5 columns here, right? So we're going to be looping through all the columns, and then I'm going to say I++, and then for the for loop, right, inside the for loop, right, we need to then get each specific column and then get its value and then insert into that specific column. So basically, I'm saying that I'm going to call row the data grid view that we created. Then I'm going to say dot cells, right, to get the cells of the data grid view. And then I'm going to say square brackets. Inside the square brackets, I actually want the specific column that we are at, right? But I want the value of that specific column that we are at. So once I find the column, right, the next thing that you need to do is to then insert the value from the timetable. So I'm going to say timetable, right, at index I, which is the row, right, comma, then I'm going to say col, right, which is the column that I want to edit, or I want to get the value from, right? So once I've gotten that, right, then that should insert the value into the data grid view, right? Once it's inserted to the data grid view, then I need to then, after this for loop, right, inside the first for loop, right, we need to add this new row, this edited row, to the data grid view. So basically what you're going to do, you're just going to say data grid view 1 dot rows dot add, right? And then you're just going to put in row inside it, right? And then that's going to just insert everything that is in the array to the data grid view, right? I don't think you would be tested on this thing to that extent, but the adding to a list view, right, that's something you might see, but I don't think you would be tested on this. But you will be tested on 2D arrays, right? Using for loops, creating methods like so, right? Using outputting to a message box, etc. So let's just run the application and see. So when the form loads, I wanted to actually have the so there's an error. So I actually wanted to have okay, I see where the error is. I wanted to show the details, right? So let me just change this to call, right? So That should fix it. Must be non-negative, right? So let me stop it and see where did I mess up. I'm gonna have to put a breakpoint to see because I'm unsure why it's crashing here. So before it crashes, so it just says that index is out of range. Okay, so we're gonna have to check because I'm assuming if it's gonna crash here. Wait, let me check something. I think what I need to do is firstly I have to add the columns, right? So maybe let me just add a column, right? The columns here so that I can see why. Maybe it's that. So let me say grade 1. Oh, no, that's the name. So it should be together. And then I want it to be a text box. I just want it to be a column. Excuse me. Okay, it's fine. Let me just add it like this. So let me just add the columns because I'm assuming that the reason why maybe it's crashing, it's because of this, because there's no columns within the data grid view because we want to edit the data grid view. So let me just check if it's not that. Okay, I use grade 2 somewhere. So this should be grade 3. And then I'm going to change the text to grade 3. Yeah, I'm going to change that grade 3 to grade 2. And then that's grade 4. And then that's grade 4. Let's do 4 for the header text. And then grade 5. Make sure that the name is in one place, and then grade 5 as a space like that. And then I've added. Then I'm going to click close. Then I'm going to click edit again. I want to change this one. I named it grade 2, but for the header text, I said grade 3, so grade 2. Then I'm going to click OK. Let me run it and see if it's still. Okay. Is less than the size of the data grid view. So now the issue is that now I'm not seeing why the error or where the error is coming from. Let me just see. Because that I is, so I'm assuming that it's not this here, right? The error is coming from this thing. So yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna do it another way because I can see that it's I can't really tell why I'm getting the error. So to save myself the trouble, what I'll do is, since I created the columns there, right? So I already have the columns. So what I'll do is from row 1, right? I'll just add the items to the row. So I'm gonna say okay, for the data grid view, because I don't want to use this, I don't want to use a for each loop because you haven't got into a for each loop, right? But I was just gonna say what is this? So I'm looking for a data row, right? Data grid view row. Then I'm just gonna say row in data grid view 1 dot rows, right? And then when I do this, right, I can actually get a row, right? So like this is just gonna go through the number of rows, but that won't work that way. Okay, no, it won't work that way. So I'm just thinking of a way to deal with this. I have an idea, but I'm trying to avoid it because I'm absolutely confused myself. Where did I mess up with this? But it should be coming from here because it seems like it's not creating the rows, right? Where the problem was, as I said. Okay, I think I see where the problem was. So like now it's showing, right? Because as I was saying earlier, that this data grid view was empty, right? It didn't have the columns, right? So I just had to manually add the column. So I had to click this three dots, sorry, this button here at the top right. And then once I click it, this menu will appear. And then I added the columns, right? So make sure that the naming here is together, and then you can leave spaces if you want to for the header text. And then once you've added all the 5 columns, right, as you can see, there's the 5 columns, right? So from the code here, right, when you create a new row, it's just going to be creating cells of a new row based on the columns that are here, right? And then we're going to loop through all the columns from column 0 to column 4, right? Or from column 1 up until column 5, right? And then it's going to be inserting the specific timetable for that specific row, and then we're just going to add that entire row to the data grid view, right? So I was just having an issue with this because I couldn't see what I did wrong, but now I've found it. And then when you click check for clash, right, and then it should pop up the sections with the clashes, right? So yeah, you can edit the code, right? If you want to add an extra function, add an input form, and then you're gonna insert, you're not gonna be doing this stuff on the form load method, right? You're gonna have to click a button, and then when you click that button, you're gonna insert the details to the array, right? How many times there is, and then once you insert the details into the array, then you're gonna just click, and you're gonna have another button, transfer to grid view, right? And then when you click that button, it should transfer everything that is in the array into the grid view. So this is just this code here. And then once you've done that, then it should work the same way, right? We're not going to cover that aspects because of the time. All right. So that brings us to the end of this session, guys. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. If not, you may leave the session. Cheers, guys.